we should just be more open-minded about it. But it is kind of useful to see those things in Threads and in X, just because you're not going to be ignorant. You're at the very least able to see people's real thoughts. I actually appreciate that more often than not. I'm grateful that people are posting their genuine thoughts, and you got to differentiate between that and rage bait. But it's like some of the things that they say, it's like, okay, I would understand where they're coming from if they didn't have the emotional maturity to really think deeply about it.
One of the things that I want to talk with you about. So I sent you a bunch of things and online, and you've seen the clips that I've seen. So there's a lot of conspiracy theory. There's a lot of just people basically bashing the California government for not doing a very effective job. And like I know like most of the time you spend your time in Threads, so which I think is great. I wanted to see what your opinion was and what you see, because you see like the Threads side, which like what we talked about before was like more on the liberal left kind of a sense, and then I scroll more on X, which is more like an right conservative kind
I feel like
of a
they're
sense.
both the same, to be honest, because X and Threads, I don't know, like I've just seen them as unhinged opinions in all sides. And it's just like, well, Threads is just easier because I actually use Instagram. And so when you're scrolling, you see Threads, and like somebody maybe has an opinion about like marriage or what's happening with Gavin Newsom.
Right.
And it's just like, did you just say that? Okay, like let me actually see it, and then let me see the reactions. And more often than not, like I see, to me, is like, this is so unhinged that I'm surprised you're willing to put this out there, because potentially this could get you in deep waters in your workplace. But that's
What
just
was the
me.
most unhinged thing you saw, like,
I
online
mean, I
about
haven't, I can't think
fires?
of it at the moment, but like little things that I see, and this could be in Threads, or it could just be in Facebook, and then it could just be rage bait at the same time. So who knows?
Mhm.
But it's almost like maybe they're talking about like first dates, for example. And this
Right.
isn't too unhinged, but it's like like who should be paying. Like that's actually pretty normal. But then maybe when they're talking about like maybe on the sexual aspect of it as well, where it's like certain expectations that needs to happen. And there's some things where I'm like, okay, I guess that's what everybody's thinking, because my thoughts and opinions are just the opposite of what you're thinking. Um,
Right.
I mean, it's just kind of hard to remember at the very moment, like some really unhinged things. Oh, like maybe something that I remember is more like the Israel and the Middle Eastern conflict. All of a sudden,
Mm.
I'm seeing some stuff where it's like, this is thanks to Joe Biden. And I don't want to get too political on it, but it's like, I understand it's technically under Joe Biden's term as president, but
Right.
there's kind of crazy that we're not giving Donald Trump the credit. And it's very
Right.
obvious. Like, let's not get so caught up in the political bubbles that it's like you can't give props to the other side, because it's like it's obviously is because of Donald Trump's push for there really to be peace, and for there to like for the hostages to be sent back to Israel. It's like, yeah,
Hmm.
it's obviously, it's so obvious, and I don't follow it too hard, but like, it's so obviously that, but we're not even giving the due diligence that like Donald Trump should have.
Right.
It's kind of wild. I don't know. I think we should just be more open minded about it. But it is kind of useful to see those things in Threads and in X, just because you're not going to be ignorant. You're at the very least able to see people's real thoughts. I actually appreciate that more often than not. I'm grateful that people are posting their genuine thoughts, and you got to differentiate between that and rage bait. But it's like some
Hmm.
of the things that they say, it's like, okay, I would understand where they're coming from if they didn't have the emotional maturity to really think deeply about it. And I think this is like, for example, I feel like there's the insurance debacle that's been happening in California, and just how insurance companies are evil. But
Right.
there is a time and place for those things. It's I think I think people in general just has to step back and just start recognizing that not everybody's gonna try and get you. And this is like gonna be really broad, like maybe for minorities thinking that police are gonna come and get them. Generally speaking, people like people, you've experienced them, and they have their own lives to get with, like, but they're not specifically targeting you because they have other things going on in their lives. It's almost like
Yeah.
a student in, like, maybe they're not doing great in school and say, oh, it's because the professor is specifically targeting whatever my assignments is. The professor just, like, from his own experience, is just like, this is just not the work that requires to get an A, in their own mind. Like, they're too busy to think about you yourself as well, which is a good thing, I think.
It's kind no, it's kind of like it's kind of ignorant. I told you, like, so there's this book, 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. One of the rules there was, say, like, don't take anything too personal. And I think that that was a prime example of what you said with insurance companies, like, oh, I'm the victim here, and start blaming everything else.
Mhm.
It becomes kind of prideful in a sense. And it's funny, like, especially in the church. I'm not sure about the church culture in the US per se, but I do know of, like, in the Philippines, where at least when you say pride, it's like the bragging, showing off kind of
Mhm.
type. We don't really think about this other aspect of pride where you think that nothing is your fault, like everything else is to blame, like something is wrong with everything else. And
Mhm.
that's kind of the thing with, like, insurance companies. And if you really take it into perspective, like what you said, they well, if like what they said, like, let's say these people say, like, these are true, like these insurance companies don't care
Mhm.
for what you have, right? Like, that they shouldn't give a crap about you per se,
I
and
think
should
it's
really
just
be.
business. I
It
think
is.
it just comes down to that, where what is it? It's like maybe the niche, the like in the movies, right? Where it's like, it's not personal, it's just business. And I think like a true businessman would understand that. And that's not trying to downplay the things that have been lost in California with fire insurance.
Right.
It's not but rather it's just understanding both sides. And not and part of that is those insurance companies, they see the data, they're data driven, right? And so they see that what's happening is there's so much risk, so they got to increase your premium because it makes
Mm.
economic sense, right? And but the government of California doesn't allow them to increase those premiums, and so those
Right.
premiums stay low for the risk. And what happens is those companies, insurance companies, they are gonna not renew your fire insurance, for example. Like,
Right.
it makes sense. I think also there's a lot of people that just like labeling a whole industry as evil. Like, so what does that say to the person working in that industry? So I like, are you now labeled, are you evil for being an insurance agent, like for working in that field? It reminds me of the issue with Luigi Mangione, right?
Oh, right.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh, the CEO is evil for doing that, but I mean, he's being labeled evil for what? Like, for doing his job. Okay, so like, what's the alternative? Like, let's think about the alternative. Okay, like in terms of insurance, what is the alternative for insurance? Like, should like I because I just don't see how economically it's gonna work. You get insurance, and this is why people get frustrated. You get insurance not to hopefully not use in the future.
Right.
So it's kind of like, it's not as what is it? What's that word? It's not
Like,
as intuitive. It's not
what
as
is it?
intuitive. Where it's
Intuitive.
like,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily an investment. It's you you waste it if you don't use it. But that's the nature of insurance, and some people might deem that as evil. But what happens? What's the alternative of that? If you actually do get to use it, you actually get something new, right? Like car insurance, for example. Let's say you get hit, and then you get money, so then you'll be able to afford another car in the future. But if you don't have car insurance, like both sides, there could be multiple victims on this. Like it's a more complicated issue, but then to continue labeling this industry is evil for this or that, I think in general people just need to have more accountability on it. Because, and this is not, once again, to downplay the victims of maybe insurance fraud, like, you know, things that the nature of the human nature of business sometimes, which can be disgusting and not intuitive. But I don't know, it's just I think sometimes it's a lack of accountability, because why is it like, because you're signing a contract. It's not like insurance companies are like having a gun to your head. It's like, hey, you got to sign this.
Yeah.
Right? It's business. You chose that insurance company, right? Like if you didn't, then that's not right. And you know, we can go to that topic maybe in like later, where the government is forcing you to have certain insurances. But it's
that's just messed up. Yeah.
So like giving the people the option and just better understanding that, like people need to have accountability, right? Like you signed that contract. Why are we getting frustrated that maybe like that those people don't want to renew that contract? Like it's all case to case basis, but as a general rule, I just see it as one needed to be more informed. And like, I mean, at the same time, it's not their fault. Like in the case of California fires, the management or the people in power in California, the state government should have done better. I think we should focus more on that rather than those shady insurance companies that is very much data driven and gets all that flack, as they rightfully should. But then if they get that flack, what happens is, you know, like there's lawsuits that can go against them. But what happens if the government does all that? I mean, they can still stay in their jobs. Like,
I got a bone to pick with you. Like, no, not with you, but like with what you said, it got a triggered two things. Like,
yeah,
one with insurance. Like, think about it. Like, insurance, isn't there, whenever you get a loan, like, doesn't it make your loan like cheaper, or you get a better deal when you have insurance? So like, I'm kind of thinking about it.
I don't think so.
Blaming insurance companies.
No. Oh, sorry. You can continue.
Not necessarily cheaper, but like it helps you. Like whenever you get a car loan, like, say for example, you get a car loan. Like one of the terms would be like you need to get insurance on it, and you know, yeah, it's kind of inconvenient as a consumer or as the borrower of money. But when you really think about it, okay, what if these insurance companies didn't exist and all these accidents happen? Wouldn't the alternative also mean that these loans would necessarily become more expensive? That's because that's why people like companies like are willing to loan you this, is because number one, you have a sort of protection against it. Like, isn't that the case?
Well, so for example, if I try to if I try to get financing to get a car, right, and I get a loan, I don't think I don't need insurance to do that, because it's rather
Really?
like, why do you need insurance for that? Like, what insurance is that? Is that like finance insurance? No, it's just a deal between.
Like just for like the actual asset, like for car loan.
No. So what happens? Let's, for example, like I'm gonna get a financing for a $20,000 vehicle. That is separate from me then having to get insurance legally, like I need to get insurance to be able to drive that vehicle around. That's separate. So it's like that's not between me and the seller. That is completely different. So it's just a different, like, it's almost like it's just part of maintaining your car. It's part of just being able to drive your car. Not only do I, let's say, get financing for $20,000 to actually have the car, on top of that, I need to get insurance so I can be okay with the government to legally be able to drive it. And that's a separate entity that I need to talk to.
Right. And the other thing which you mentioned was like trying to have people take accountability, which I honestly I do not know how it's come to this situation. There were so many factors that have led up to this disaster. It wasn't like one thing triggered this large wildfire. It was multiple things. First, with environmentalists, which I've been saying this for a while now. I think environmentalism is a big scam, to the point where it's trying to
How do you mean?
control life. Like here's like your environmentalism to the extreme, and to the extreme is trying to say we're going to protect the environment at the cost of human life or human lifestyle. Now, am I okay with making a few changes, like using paper bags instead of plastic? If that helps create a better environment, or using a more energy efficient electronics? Sure, why not? When you go to the extreme of where you're not experiencing a drought in California because you're rerouting the water to protect a tiny little fish, the smelt, was it? That was the one. Yeah. So you already have an agriculture problem, and now we see that it's a fire problem because these firefighters don't have any water to fight the wildfires with, which is another crazy thing. Isn't the whole point, like, if you go back, we're gonna go put a little church principle on it. In Genesis, what didn't it say there? Like in the first chapter, like all these were created so that Adam and Eve can use. Like you could use everything. It was to be used by man. Why is it that it's kind of backwards right now? Like we're supposed to be the slaves to the environment, like to the resources that we're supposedly supposed to use. And I get sustainability to have these resources in the future, and I get like trying to be more efficient with the use of it. Like that's what innovation does. Like look at what smartphones brought us. We had 50 tools wrapped up in a single device. That's an efficient use, and we didn't achieve that by limiting the resources that you could use. We did that by thinking smarter, by becoming better, and by creating new things, and having new developments that people could use. We did do that by strictly restricting and limiting human needs for the sake of protecting the environment that's supposed to help us.
Well, hindsight is 2020. Like looking back, we can see that there's so much stuff that management could have done a lot better. But isn't it also important to protect our environment? Isn't it important to make sure that we're treating the environment correctly?
It is important, but you also gotta be smart about it. We sometimes the worst thing about it is like we think about we have to be environmentalists, we have to protect the environment, and we only think that there's one option. We don't think of win-win solutions.
Yeah.
We end up in scenarios where it's like a lot of the times it's like lose-win, and most of the time it's win for the environment. Which another thing is like, is it really the environment that you're trying to protecting, or is there like a subsecret agenda? Like that's another like serious thing. Like that's
conspiracy. Yeah. Well, I think what you're trying to get at is that there's always a trade-off. There's always a trade-off, and in this case, it seems as though the trade-off is incredibly dumb. That we're not prioritizing human life, property over what I'm hearing is like your opinion that like the lives of this particular fish species isn't as important, which actually I would agree with. And I think people are always trying to get all the wins. I get like have their cake and eat it too, but then there's an understanding that there's a trade-off for that. And if the trade, I think a lot of people in California, if they can, and they just need to be more informed and better understand that the trade-off would be, if we're going to prioritize human life, that means we're going to prioritize human life and prevention methods, which is, doing the burns of things that could easily catch on fire, or having the water necessary in case there is a fire. Because imagine if there wasn't a fire this year. I mean, they did those budget cuts for firefighters. It's stupid looking at it now because the fires did happen. But let's say they cut 17 million out of the budget for firefighters, but there's no big fires that happened this year. Like, what's going to happen is management looks like a genius, right? It's like, oh, they saved money. But then it's just a numbers game. I think this is where it's important to be almost like a private insurance company. Like, just look at the numbers, see what's happening. How much are you willing to have the manpower to be there or to do a lot of prevention? And generally speaking, like, it's easy to see it from the number side. It's better to do prevention than actually like putting out the fires. And this goes with anything. This means like with any industry, like let's say the health, is better to prevent things from happening. There's like maybe you're drinking too much soda, things like that, rather than doing the surgery to finally get better, or like taking certain things. And so, I mean, it's easier said than done. And I think it's also important that in these cases, we're going about with conspiracy. I think in general, it's important to realize that people make mistakes and not that they're out there to get you, right? It comes back to that idea. And I'm sure these things are very real. It's very real that somebody or an organization, has those evil intentions, to kind of maybe to cause mayhem for people. But as a general rule, like, people just make mistakes. Like, they have their own ambitions and priorities over trying to hurt specific individuals. Actually, I'm sorry. As we're talking about this, makes me just think about like car salesmen. Like, they're not there to specifically screw you as the individual. Like, they're trying to get a good deal as well. Because like everybody needs to eat, right? Like, there are certain jobs. Like, so, but having the understanding of what's their incentive and what's your incentive can help you like negotiate. If you're an employer and employee, there's always this dynamic or like the power dynamic there. But at the same time, you got to understand. It kind of reminds me, Chris, if you remember this in our economics, we were never classmates, but I'm pretty sure Dr. Vicente talked about this, where if somebody's paying you like $20 an hour, that must mean that they see that your value has to be more than $20 an hour, right? Like, because you have to be providing more value for the company for them to hire you at a certain rate. Because if they're not, because if you're, let's say they're paying you $20, but you only give them $15 worth of value per hour, it's really stupid of the company. And those things happen, right? And I think an example of this is like sports, where a very popular example is like maybe a particular athlete. So, they're not worth $20 million a year. Like, this guy who's getting paid $2 million a year is having the same stats. So like, it happens. It's not like one side knows all. And this would include the employers, like, to the employee. And there's always that like dynamic of finding out what's there. But like, that's where knowing your worth and like having that skill set, it's all this complexity thing where everybody's just trying. It's the market. It's the, what is it? What's Adam Smith would say? The hand of the market, right? where
the invisible hand.
the invisible hand, yeah, it's trying to get to that perfect golden spot.
Right.
I mean, that's just how it is. But yeah, that's just what I'm thinking. I don't know. We're like, I'm like ranting, maybe like not exactly into fire stuff anymore, but
No, but like I'm not now. I'm actually thinking. So on the basis of leadership, like you mentioned earlier, like insurance companies have these data and they're able to measure the risk, and they see that California just isn't worth it. Um, Two questions, which is kind of like the same question. It was like number one, why doesn't the government have this information, or why aren't they doing anything about it? I mean, they must have seen and they must have known that this was a risky move. Like,
I think
like
you got to be careful with that. It's like they must have known, right? It's like the U.S. government is trillions of dollars in this and this research, but like they have to know. No, I think generally speaking, if you could choose between like malicious intent over just being incompetent, generally speaking, it's just incompetency. It's
really?
just I believe so. And at the same time, when you're like we're mentioning private against public, and I think as a general rule, like, and I think this is what makes the United States actually a really unique country. Because I think in most other countries, they want you to go to the public sector. Like they want you to work at the government because the government has like the best benefits and it's kind of prestigious. If I correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, in the Philippines, it's like if you're a police officer, like you get quite a good benefit, like you get pretty good benefit. If you're a public officer, like if you work for the government in the Philippines, it's generally speaking better than working in the private industry. Am I wrong on this? Like, what's your thoughts?
I've heard, like, I've had experiences with, like, I've had friends who say it's better to work in the public sector. Like, for example, if you're a teacher, you're getting a higher pay if you teach in public schools. Not sure about the police officer thing. I do know, and this I have had a friend work in the Department of Labor,
Mm-hmm.
and their salary always comes in late. And
Oh,
this
really?
wasn't just
Interesting.
yeah, this wasn't just the Philippines. I have had another friend in the U.S. She was working for the Department of Labor in Hawaii, and
Mhm.
she's also said the same thing. So I'm not sure if it's like a general rule that it happens everywhere because they're like you're the Department of Labor, no one's going to catch you, you can get away with it, kind of a thing.
Mm,
But
yeah.
more, it depends on the playing field. But I do see in some places where working in the public sector it is better because, well, number one, you know you're always going to have a job. They're always going to pay you. They're never. I don't want to say they're never going to run out of money. They're millions, trillions in debt, but they always certainly have a way to pay you and make sure they obey on incentivize you to keep you there.
Yeah. I mean, I asked that question because I think what makes the United States a little bit unique from other countries is just how, from my experience, from what I've just seen, more people are interested in going to the private industry rather than public because there's just more upside in the private industry. I think like people are more focused on that upside there. However, the ceiling is also lower. Like, I mean, not the ceiling, the floor is lower in the private industry.
Mm-hmm.
But if you work in public, like there is that safer net, like the floor is a lot higher, like you mentioned, in terms of public. And it's especially from just from my own anecdotal experiences, like you're not ever going to get fired unless you do something absolutely stupid. It's very difficult to get fired in the public sector.
Right.
And like you don't necessarily have to answer like to performance. I think generally speaking, I think public is more of a time, how long you've been in that industry rather than your skills. While in the private sector, it's almost like how somebody can learn programming or computer tech stuff, and then as long as they have their coding down, like somebody can hire them. While in the public sector, it's going to be a lot more on like just your time. It's almost like specifically your time rather than your skills. And as well as it's just more efficient with the private industry. I mean, an example of that, you can just, I mean, what is it? A more modern example is SpaceX and NASA, right? I mean,
Right. That's they've accomplished more than SpaceX. Talking about SpaceX, not NASA. They've accomplished more than NASA, and they're in the private. And
well,
it
it's not just it's the private. I think it's just really like let's breaking it down. It's just the incentive structure,
right.
right? With NASA, let's say all these tax money that goes into it, and I'm sure there's brilliant people in NASA. I'm not saying that they're lesser than SpaceX. Rather, just the incentives of the two different industries is just completely different. While NASA is like trying to maintain and like they could have a lot more funding in terms of SpaceX, like they have to innovate or they will die. If
Mhm.
NASA, let's say, doesn't do anything innovative, they're not really gonna go away. Like it's
No.
only recently with Donald Trump. Oh, and it's gonna be his inauguration tomorrow.
Right.
Um, like with the Doge department,
Department of Government Efficiency. Yeah.
yeah, it's like you don't really hear about departments closing down. They only expand, receive more money, and then do X, Y, and Z. And it kind of goes back into California. California as a state, if I remember correctly, it could be like one of the top 10 economies in the world if it's its own country. Like straight up, one of the top
If
10
it could,
economies, if
really?
just the state itself, yeah. And it's like, it's not a money problem, it's a management problem. And you can just see it in general. It's like the United States is one of the more economically strong countries, but there's
Wait, wait.
there's infrastructure that needs work. It's not a money problem. Once again, it's a management problem, and it comes down to certain incentives, like
Wait,
the
when you
human.
say
Yeah.
like when you say that they could be one of the top 10 countries, like
Hmm.
economically speaking, like what's that on the basis on? Because I like don't they also have like the highest income tax and
Yeah, I
that
mean
kind of
it's
makes
like the
sense honestly,
GDP,
but like
the GDP
the
of the state.
GDP wise. Okay.
Yeah, is if I'm pretty sure it's number five, but like I don't want to say number five. If anything, I'm gonna give myself a cushion for 6 to 10. But I'm pretty sure it's like it could literally be. So let's say, so China obviously is not gonna increase. India, no. Germany maybe, like it might even match Germany, if not slightly lower. I could see that. So
Mhm.
like what other big superpower, economic superpower is there? I mean Russia, I guess. Like there's already the United States, that's already five. So I mean California as a state makes more than Canada. As a state, like
Really?
makes more than Mexico. So I mean, once again, it's not a revenue problem. They don't have problems getting taxes or anything. It's just management. And this kind of reminds me that we solved world hunger. As like humanity, we have solved world hunger. And what I mean by that is we create more food enough to feed everybody. Everybody in the world, like the 8 billion people in the world, we have enough food to like feed every single person. We
Mhm.
don't have a food problem. It's a management problem. And what I mean by management problem is just like certain groups of people, as in America, like particularly the United States, like we have like we make too much food in a way. Like there's so much waste, for example. So
Mhm.
it's not a mathematic problem. It's like if that's the case, like that we officially serve world hunger, it's a behavioral and management problem. Certain places in around the world, as a worldwide thing, doesn't have enough food, for example. And it kind of makes me think, as we're just talking about this one, makes me think that like it's a privilege. It's a privilege to be in a country where you can be deemed poor and still be obese. Like that is a privilege when you really think about it. It make because throughout all of world history, to have the luxury to have a lot of fat on you, let's say, like to have to be excessively obese, that's a sign of wealth. Throughout all of human history, is very recent that it's like that's happening, and that is a problem, sure. But when you put it into the context of human history, we're very privileged to have that problem. And that I'm not saying that to be like, hey, we're done, but like it just puts things into perspective. Because I don't think you'll ever see like in India where like if you're poor, you're also fairly obese. Like it just the correlation doesn't quite work. And obviously we could always do better with health and things like that. But at the same time, as I'm talking about it, it kind of makes me think about the solution is not for more government regulations like Coca-Cola, you gotta have like certain like sugars or whatever. I think it's more of a individual choice, and you know it is an issue, however, where sugar is subsidized by the government, and so it's cheaper sometimes. Actually, most of the time, it's cheaper to eat more junk food than healthier food. That is true, but that's not the issue of why like maybe a lot of people are obese, and that might be a little bit controversial. But I say that because I firmly believe that as the individual, you have more choices. You have more willpower than you might think than the government doing everything for you, like counting your calories.
I mean, I had no idea even that the government subsidized sugar.
Oh yeah,
With this. That's
like
that's actually a thing.
well yeah. Well they try to do it because it's also part of lobbying, and it's not like I don't even see people that do lobbying as evil people because like they have their own constituents. they're doing their own job. Like I see it as just better understanding where each side is coming from. So you know, a lot of these bigger companies that sell food, well, part of it is sugar is more addictive, and so they're kind of like pushing it so that certain foods are going to be a little bit cheaper, so they can make and mass produce and then have it to more people, like sell it to more people. And then I think the counter to that would be like, isn't that immoral to create that? But like, we gotta put it into perspective, where having no food, like having unhealthy food is better than having no food. And with that being said, once again, like I don't want this to come across as we can't improve, like, or this is good enough. But it's so much better that we have the ability to get those cheaper foods than having none at all. And like those other companies out there, like what's their incentive? They're trying to sell stuff. Sure. And it kind of just makes me think of there's a difference between what people say and what people do. And I think one of the more popular examples of that, and it's been going on for a while, is like Apple. I think there's a lot more, just from what I have seen, there's a lot more people that are kind of poo-pooing the idea of people using Apple products because it's inferior to, let's say, Android or Samsung. And that could be true. Like in terms of like the specs, it just looks like specs wise, from what I have seen. Oh yeah, like the hardware wise, Samsung is just better. Like there is actually no doubt in my mind.
Yeah.
To me, there's no doubt in my mind that hardware wise, Samsung is better. And sometimes like their computing power is so much better. But the thing is, what Apple does is they have a better like software. It just has a better experience for people. And it kind of makes me think of how like Android, like you have more customizability, is like, and look at these Apple sheep. But what does the market say? It's like there's all this talk that sometimes I see about that. But the market says people love Apple. like there's what everybody like. Where's what I see is more people talking about it negatively compared to what actually people have watched. And it's actually this has got me thinking about some media things. So you know how you notice how in social media, in movies and such, there's like maybe something big's happening and there's a part one and a part two.
Right.
Like
Okay.
for example, in Harry Potter, the very last movie, I think they're the ones that started this trend. It's like it's Harry Potter last movie part one. It's like wait, what? And then the last movie part two. It's like wait, I have to watch two movies to watch one full story of the movie. It's like okay, that's like, and there's a lot, and I'm part of that group where I'm like I don't really like the fact that they're doing that, but you know what happened? It's a box office hit. It's people like myself maybe like criticizing that, kind of complaining about it, but the market says that's okay. Like, what are you gonna do about it? Hunger Games also has that. Hunger Games Part
Oh,
One,
yeah,
Part Two,
they
in the
did
last
that.
movie, and there's more stuff, more examples out there. But I think what that showed is just all these people. Oh, and especially I'm a gamer, and so like there's a lot of things that people don't like about certain games. Let's say, but what are people actually acting on? Like, let's say an example of one of the more popular games is like League of Legends. I remember a time when people are complaining because this or that character is too overpowered, but then it's like too many people are playing the game. Like, so too many people are playing still. Like, what's the best way? Oh, here's a great example. So you know microtransactions. Here is
Right.
actually something really interesting that people, we as a whole, like, and I'm just gonna speak for myself, but like the gaming industry as a whole. In 2024, the game Baldur's, oh, actually not 2024, like I think 2023. In the year 2023, this game called Baldur's Gate 3 won like Game of the Year. Fantastic, right? How much did they
Right.
earn in revenue? It's like $1 billion, something like
What
that,
the
right? Like it's a lot. If not a billion, like maybe 100 million or something. It was an insane amount, right?
heck?
And it's
Okay.
game of the year, meaning it's the best game of 2023, like as a general rule. But there's a game in that's been out already for a while. It's called Genshin Impact. Now this game is you can play it in your mobile phone, and in this game, like it also does micro. It does it. So the difference between like I want to focus on the two differences. Baldur's Gate, um, you buy the game for like $60 and then you can play it. Now this other game is a free game. It's free, FREE. While you can get cosmetic skins and microtransactions like that. In
Oh yeah, like small
2023,
purchases you make in
let's say
game.
as an
Yeah.
example, Baldur's Gate made like $1 billion. This game made, let's say, like $1,100,000,000, like $1.1 billion, and this was Game of the Year. Now, what does that tell the market? And this is what I think like is a lot more gamers are more outspoken about, more, let's say, passionate about. Is like they hate microtransactions so much, supposedly. Yet, in the year where one of the best games came out for that year, it was still beaten out by revenue due to this other game that's not even new. That didn't even come out that year. It's been going on for a while. If you ever heard about it, it's like Genshin Impact. And what does that tell the market? Like, on one side, there's certain people, myself included, kind of complaining about these microtransactions. But on the other, why are they raking in so much money? It's like they're providing a value. Like I personally do not really value cosmetic skins that I personally would spend money on. A lot of people do. That's fine. But like, what does that say? Like my opinion compared to another person's. Like the money they're willing to put where their money where their mouth is. So there's all these issues, and for example, this is also why like mobile gaming has grown exponentially. um, Man, I'm forgetting this one game right now, and as I'm just talking about it, like it makes me think about shoot. There's one of the more popular games in the
Right. What
mobile.
is it like? What's the feature of it like?
It's almost like you're a war. You make your city center, and then like you fight other cities. Um,
Oh, like there's Lords of Mobile. There's
yeah. It's practically like
what
that, like Lords of
yeah,
Mobile, like
something like that.
Lord Mobile or whatever. It's similar to that, right? Those games make more money than a lot of AAA games. And there, for one, is just in your mobile phone. It's like it's not like it was graphically intense, but
Mhm.
people are willing to pay more money for those than actual AAA games. And who's to blame? Who's to blame? And there's not exactly like a person, but it's just like understanding where the incentives are. I don't know if you ever heard of this game. It's called Skyrim. That game came out in
Right.
2011, November 11. I remember that because that's my favorite
That's
game.
11.
Like that game has so many re-releases, but like that game makes less money probably than a bunch of these other games now that are just doing microtransactions. And it's funny. I think it's part of it is there could be an issue of gambling addicts. I can see that. I can see that counter argument, and it can be valid to a point. Because I feel like it's not, especially if you're an adult, 18 or older. Like you can't. I don't think you can really give that as an excuse.
Mhm.
It's almost like okay, it's like where's the incentives going to? People should developers should make more games into microtransactions because supposedly they can make more money that way. And who's the fault? Is like as a gaming community, that's what we're saying. We're giving them the signal to do that. Because if it's not that way, we would, as a community, we would have spent more money on things that we value more. So in this case, in this example, we valued Genshin Impact more than Baldur's Gate 3 as
Right.
from an economic standpoint.
Right.
And we can't fault like game developers for going towards that route because we're telling them that is what we want as a community.
Right.
I know. I've just been ranting about it, but like I don't know if there's
No,
anything similar that you can see in another industry where it's like that, where people say one thing, but their wallet is saying another.
that's like the first thing that when you ask that, the first thing that pops to mind, especially when we're talking about it, is insurance. But then again, like if this really was like okay, for example, let's
Mm,
go outside of the U.S. because there seems to be a policy where medical, at least medical insurance is required for everyone, and
mhm,
if you don't have it, there's like a government subsidized one. Let's step outside to other places like the Philippines. So the Philippines has a government subsidized healthcare, which everyone needs to have, but
mhm,
you don't pay as much. Like your Filipinos can't pay that much, uh, which kind of sucks. So the alternative is like you can get other kinds of insurance.
mhm,
There are other places like in our home at least there are insurance policies which we don't really like. We're not forced to get them. There's nothing that's forcing us. There isn't a government that's holding a gun to our head saying you have to get it, which is
do,
great.
do
And
you have
the other thing is like
homeowners insurance? Is that something you need to have?
there's that's I don't know
Oh,
anyone.
what is it
I
that you need
don't
to
know a lot
have
of people
in regards with insurance?
like medical insurance. Like you have government subsidized medical insurance, which is that's pretty much it. It doesn't cost a lot. It
Oh,
takes a
so
very small
are you
amount from your
saying that
paycheck.
everybody needs to have like everybody by government is needs to have medical insurance?
Like this Phil Health, yeah. This is the one that you
Okay,
need to have. So
that's interesting.
that aside, like that's like a cheap one. Like I think a majority of people don't even care about it because like when medical stuff does happen, and it happens a lot in the Philippines, especially in a country where you got a lot of people giving birth. Like you got teenage pregnancy, and a lot of these things just like skyrocket. That helps. But then you have other people who choose to get insurance, but because it's not forced, these insurance companies are forcing or are forcing themselves to create other creative ways that will help them profit, that they can
Mhm.
still make money off, but also that will be attractive to customers. One of the things that we have is we have like this card. So you pay like 100 pesos a month for
Uh-huh.
this card, but it insures you for 80,000, and you renew it like every year. It's called term insurance, and this is so much cheaper than like a lifelong plan. The other one is there's like life insurance where if you pay like 1,200 and you get like 2 million back, like when you die. Well, 2 million if you die
Whoa.
through an accident, and then 1 million if it's like natural causes. And I think like looking at it, I read it. Ins- the deals that I got are better, and it
Wait, are
kind of
you saying
makes
that in
sense.
private it's better than the public? What do you mean? The deals?
I'm saying like some private sects, like private insurance in the Philippines is like value wise better than the US, which is crazy. Like term insurance in itself, like I
Oh
haven't
yeah.
heard of.
No, I think it does make sense if because supply and demand. What has happened in the Philippines, it's not you're not forced it. So that means
Right,
that the demand is shifting. Like it depends. Like you need to incentivize customers. While in the
right.
US, the demand is at an all-time 100% because you have to get it by government standards. And if you don't get it by government standards, if you don't get it, you technically can get fined. You can technically go to jail for that.
Right. Which
Now,
kind of is it crazy that if you don't have insurance, you get jailed for that? Like you're already poor, we're
well,
gonna
here
punish
I
you even
think
more.
I think we gotta differentiate between the intentions and the actual policy
Like
of the thing.
result, yeah.
And I believe that the intention of everybody needs to get insurance is that if you get into a car accident, right? Like insurance can cover it. Like things like that, like what insurance is supposed to do. But in an attempt to create that perfect world, you just artificially increase demand. And
Hmm.
then because of the demand being artificially increased so much, the suppliers now have a lot more leverage, uh, in
Hmm.
which you can't blame them for wanting to have more profit. Like it's one of those situations where, like I think when I say that, like you can't blame them. Like what's the alternative? I think the alternative should be that they don't need to have insurance. And as much as like the roads are public roads, you know, if you drive, like what's going to happen? I think there needs to be certain repercussions to that,
Hmm.
but the solution I don't think is necessarily more government. Because I mean, like, what would you do if you get hit and then that person doesn't have insurance? Like now your car is wrecked, let's say, and their car is wrecked. Like, what's gonna happen there? Like, how are you gonna get justice? In my mind, I'm like, okay, well, that's where you. It's not okay. That might have been an accident, but like, sir, I'm so like, never mind the intention. What you've done is you caused an accident, so then you are you need to pay for X, Y, and Z. Now,
Hmm.
if you can't do that, it's like, well, there needs to be justice here as well. So what's like before? I think it was more like people had the like your that's why like your insurance should get it, but this is one of those things where like the private industry, generally speaking, I think will better take care of it. Because if you get hit by somebody that doesn't have insurance, but you have insurance, then your insurance should be able to cover you. If not, like I don't know
You
what kind
should
of
be
insurance
fine.
you got. Um,
And
and
at
things
the
like that
very least,
happen.
from that
Like
transaction,
once again, insurance is not an investment. It is a what if. It is a you get it to hopefully not use.
right? Like it's protection, and from your example. like the least, the at the very least, when accidents like that occur, you have at least people have more incentive to drive carefully. Like see all these little things that could happen if we had less. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have government. I mean, I have different opinions of what kind of a government works, but I'm not saying that we shouldn't have government because government does provide order and structure. The problem just arises when government becomes so involved with regulations and putting price floors, price ceilings, and everything, saying what you can and can't do.
Mhm.
Again, like I just don't get it. Here's the thing. I don't get why. Well, I think it really goes back to what you say. Like we have very incompetent people. They looking back.
Well,
So
let's go with that really quickly. Sorry to interject, but like, if we have incompetent leaders, what does that say about us as the voters?
oh gosh, like
Because it's at the same time, I don't just want to put blame on one side. It's not always
right,
like employer, employee, like leader, and then like follower. It's like, hey, as a general rule, I want to focus more on the individual, creating individual choices, because that like things happen, yes, but then what are you gonna do about it? Like if
mm-hmm,
one thinks that their world is already kind of predetermined in a certain way, I
right,
think that's just really hard to live by if these people are trying to get after you, or these organizations, or these rules and laws. Rather than thinking about that, it's like, what could I do as an individual that I know can work, can improve my life, like regarding like insurance and all that. Maybe like you got to
right,
plan for it ahead of time. You got to be better aware of those things, and some of those things you can't control. Florida has
mhm,
gosh dang hurricanes. Like California, even let's say if you have the best management, could still have fires, and that's very
right,
much a possibility.
right,
But what are you going to do as an individual in those cases, like to kind of help mitigate that? Because the solution is not for the government to tell you every little thing, right? Like they have a purpose, but uh, as a general rule, like you as an individual need to take care of yourself and your family. Uh,
right.
like I think that should be the mindset going in about it.
If we're going by like what you can do as an individual, like there are certain things that I would have done, like so things that I had learned if we were trying to avoid such a situation to happen. Like one of the things I would have learned is like number one, definitely your vote matters. Vote for people who are very very competent. Do your research and see if these people have the best policies in mind. And to be able to vote for competent people, you really need to have a good understanding of politics and economics and these
Mm-hmm.
unintended consequences in the market. You have to understand what their agenda is, and you have to understand what the consequences are. And if for some reason like you're in a position where you vote and you try to express your opinions on who you think is going to bring the best for your country or your state, and you still end up with a bad leader, wasn't it the other solution is to move? Like for me, certainly one of the things that I'm trying to do is like I don't want to try and stay in one place. Like the Philippines, before I left for Hawaii, corruption was already there. Like okay, corruption is there, but it's livable. Like these things happen. Like I can live with that. If anything, like these things kind of don't affect me if you have a certain income level. If you're less dependent on the government, okay, you're fine. Now I'm seeing policies that are being put into place that no matter what your income level, or like that standard for an income level has just gotten higher. The best thing for me to do would be like to move.
Uh-huh. So
So
that
like
in a way, that's voting with your feet. Now, what
right.
policies do you mean by things that like it doesn't really matter with your economic level.
So one of the things is like for I sent you this. This is the policy where they're trying to enact a bill that says we're trying to provide sex education to children in schools. I'm like, okay, that part I don't really care because I don't want my kids to go to school. I want them to be homeschooled because there's just a lot of things that they could learn outside that they don't really know. Like they misteach a lot of things. But the other part where it says like a parent can be punished if you like try and restrict a child's sexual activity. I'm like, wait, so we have these children who can't make any major life decisions or like can't make good major life decisions and obviously don't have experience. And let's just get out the window. I think I don't care how old you are. I don't care if you're old and your information and experience isn't exactly like for the times today. Like you know how they say like boomers can't really give advice about technology and stuff. Like I don't care how old you are. For me, experience is experience, and the more you have of it, the more qualified you are to help face with personal issues today. And so if a government's trying to say that a parent can't restrict a child's decision to do that when a child can't even experience life, doesn't even experience accountability, that's something that kind of scares me a little bit. And then there's the other things are just like, okay, we're gonna make people pay more for PhilHealth. We're gonna make people pay more for SSS or the government pension plans. I'm thinking, okay, it doesn't affect me because I don't have those. Like with my track record, like with my income and with my type of work, it's it's not affected by it. The minute that they start to do that, I think people should leave. And uh, the danger, yeah, it's going to become very scary. Like you should be scared if your government enacts a rule or a law where you can't leave the country without really giving a reason as to why. Like that for me is like it's going bad, it's going south, and they know it, but they need people like to stay.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're saying that like it sounds like you want to make sure that your kids learn certain appropriate things.
Right.
But at the same time, when you said that, it kind of made me think that that's a very privileged position to be in, right? Maybe that your kids don't need to go to public school, that you have the means and resources and time to be able to do that for your kids. And you were talking about like potentially moving as well. What would you say to people that would counter that? Like that sounds all well and dandy to just simply move and maybe to do those things, but it requires resources. What if you don't have the resources and means to be able to get out? Like, are you just then screwed, or like what's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so the situation in the Philippines is very unique. The poverty and riches gap is much bigger in the Philippines.
Really?
So
than
there's
in the US?
Than in the US. Like
Okay.
like the way that I would describe it is like the distance from like the poorest of the poor to like the richest in the States, it's not too far. Like you see these homeless people you hear a lot of stories where homeless people are able to make it out and then start a business and then it's valued at like X million dollars. Like you hear a lot of those stories in the States. You don't hear that a lot in the Philippines. They exist, but it not a lot. And maybe it's like a broadcasting thing. Like the Philippines isn't that popular. I don't know. But here, in response to that, I would say this. So number one is you learn to control what you can. We have a saying in the Philippines that hindi mo mapili kung pinanganak ka sa kawawa na pamilya, pero mapipili mo kung mamatay ka sa kawawa na pamilya, which basically means you can't choose if you're born into a poor or wealthy family, but you do choose if you die in a poor or wealthy family. there's a lot of things that you can control. Learn first what are others are in your control. For example, if you do have to send your kids to public school, then make sure that in the home you have enough capacity, enough influence, enough of a good example that your children would want to listen to you. Say this law does get enacted and you can't restrict a child's sexual activity, whatever that implies. If you're a good person who is honest and truthful to your wife, you honor your wedding vows, you don't cheat, you're a very virtuous and integrous man, you have a good standing with the community,
Mm-hmm.
and that is radiated in the home. If I don't know about other people, but if I had parents like that and they told me not to do like these type of things because it's not good, I would listen to them because I see it in their examples and I see it in the way that they live their lives. You do not need wealth to have that.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's one of those things where you have to look at what you can do. I'm I'm tired of hearing the excuse of like we don't have that much resources because when you focus on that, you lose focus on what capacity you do have. Say that these laws do get enacted and I don't have that much power. I'm gonna do whatever I can. And reality is what you can do is a whole lot more than you would expect. Like you underestimate your capacity to do what is in your control.
Mm-hmm. That sounds all good. Like that sounds good, but it kind of is making me think about how, like that's an idealistic family where
Right.
there's a mother and a father who love each other, and then they have kids that they really care about and they really want them to do well. But I think in a lot more situations, it's not necessarily the case where
Right.
there's a mother and father. There's a lot more nuances, like maybe single parents,
Mm-hmm.
um, and maybe they don't have that same loving conditions. So how should government play a role in that when there's so many families that are not that idealistic form? Maybe they need those certain policies so that they can be taught somehow, some way. Because from what I'm hearing from you is that the family uh, needs to come first, and so whatever the school teaches, like the family kind of corrects that. But what if
Mm-hmm.
certain individuals, I think many individuals, won't have the family to help correct what they're learning that's wrong, and then they grow up to be, to have certain ideas? What would you say to that?
Well, that's another thing too. But like, it doesn't make sense
Mm-hmm.
to like tailor. I mean, we know the phrase "one size doesn't fit all." Isn't that what government intervention is? You're trying to make everyone fit into this one size, and
Mm-hmm.
usually the results of trying to intervene, like what we've seen in many places, California is like one of those examples where you try to make everyone or you try to make it all equal.
That's
It doesn't work too well,
that
you
actually
know.
reminds me of, like, when you're talking about the schooling in the United States, we had the No Child Left Behind program, and just hear
Okay.
that sound, No Child Left Behind. That sounds so amazing. It's like, so what it is practically, um, if for example you're in third grade and like you're not
Mhm.
ready to go to fourth grade, they'll just push you up to fourth grade anyways.
Oh my
And
god.
so on and so forth. But the thing is, the intention and like the level, like let's just from shallow level thinking, it sounds good because then they're not gonna feel left behind. It's gonna feel like they're not different from other people. But it's really taking away competition, and I think it kind of stems from the fact that there's like two different thoughts of competition. One is that competition is bad, even at younger kids, and another thinking is that competition is good. And the No Child Left Behind program is that competition is bad, and so we should kind of, like you were mentioning, one size fits all. Everybody kind of just moves up. But what we have found in those good intentions is that a lot of kids, when they make it to 8th grade, 9th, almost graduating, they severely lack like reading comprehension skills, math skills. And because, like, the reason why, part of it is with that program, what is the incentives for those schools? If they have somebody lagging behind, they're going to be seen as a bad school because that's the incentive. In terms of those public schools, they get funding as like, they meet certain quotas, and if they adhere to this No Child Left Behind thing. And so what happens is a lot of schools, to try to because they're incentivized to make sure that nobody gets left behind, they just push them forward. And that's not, like, just thinking about that, that's not necessarily the incentives that we need or that we should be thriving for. And it kind of like that opens a whole can of worms with DEI from there, because like it just comes down to incentives. And
like, let me ask you this now, like with analogy like you've given. So clearly, like, the intention was good, but it's given the wrong incentives. So what would you say? So kind of like we're supposed to incentivize people to become successful, right? Like, what if it could, like, isn't, like, here's some arguments. Like, what if it creates too much competition? That's only the winners, the already successful people who keep on getting successful. That the other people who can't seem to keep up, like they get even worse and worse. Like,
there's the gap is getting bigger. Let's say,
right?
It's like the gap is getting bigger. Well, I think there's a misunderstanding of that. As like, the misunderstanding comes from when those kids are smart, like, and then what happens is let's say they're with their own peers, and they're able to edify one another in that sense. Right. While kids that are maybe lagging, and once again, this is just one aspect, right? This is school academics. Maybe they're lagging in the academic standpoint on that. Right. Like, I don't think necessarily they're gonna fail in all parts of their life. I don't know if you ever heard about this phrase in schools, like A students work for C students, which is the idea that these A students in high school, maybe college, they work for business owners that were initially like C students. And it just comes from that. First of all, school is a bit different. There's different skill levels. There's different fields that we're more interested in. So it could just be that somebody is an A student because they're more diligent at that point in time in certain things, like doing the homework. And maybe the C student is more interested in so many other aspects, just not they're don't tell me what to do kind of kid. So it's not necessarily like, it's not a one-to-one where one is going to be successful and one's going to be a failure.
Right.
But in terms of like that gap, that's okay. That's why there's different levels to it. And so that's why there's in universities, right? There's different levels. There's what we call the Ivy League, and then there's, like, let's say, lower prestigious universities. But then it all comes down to, have you actually learned? And it's like the idea of, do you want to be a small fish in a big pond, or do you want to be a big pond in a small fish? Like, you want to be it's vice versa. Do you want to be a big fish in a small pond, or do you want to be a small fish in a big pond? And like, studies have shown that, for example, students like, Harvard, for example, that's really popular. Generally speaking, because everybody there is very academically inclined, very smart, and it becomes it's different when you have all these kids of that nature. They're top one, top two in their high school, and all of a sudden every student in a particular group is like their number one, number two. There's going to be differences in where they stand there, and sometimes some students can't handle that difference, and some students are just even more exceptional at a certain thing. But that's not, your IQ is not the only thing that matters. It's also your EQ, like your emotional intelligence, how you can handle those things. And sometimes some people are so dang smart that they don't necessarily have to study, but then the world is bigger than what they thought. And so maybe as they get in their life, like let's say at a higher level thinking, they can't just coast anymore. And it requires like a certain level of hard work. So it's a lot more complicated than that. But like regarding what you were saying with the gap between the smarter students and lower, there's more than enough success in the world for both in terms of like that, not just the academics. And if they are lagging behind, that at least you can indicate that they're lagging behind. You know, sometimes being held back a year is going to be beneficial for that that individual. It kind of reminded me of one of my good friends in Virginia. So this guy, he was held back 1 year, I think, first grade.
Really? Okay.
Or maybe even second grade. And then I was gonna have, like, we weren't in the same class in our second grade class, or actually our first grade class. So he was a year older, but because he was a year older, he just able to comprehend more stuff, and so he was then like the top student of his year, and we were practically like, oh yeah, like we're like reading, like, you know, the reading comprehension, being able to enunciate your words and reading and doing simple math, that helped him. And although there is that, you know, people can see him that, oh, he like failed one grade and then like kind of look down on him, he was like an upper tier. Like he was pretty smart. Like he was able to like ace everything ace everything, right? But like he's able to do everything well in his first grade class. And let's say he had to fail twice, or like an individual had to fail twice. At the very least, we can then diagnose what the heck's going on. And, you know, it's not, sometimes it's just not raw talent. Sometimes they don't have the means to do something, or maybe they don't have the resources to be able to study. It kind of makes me think about how, like, we live in a better world now, especially technology has improved our lives. It makes me think about my dad sometimes, where like some of the stories that he would tell me, for example, is like he would have to go to school hungry. It's like, okay, so then it's kind of hard to focus when you're hungry, when you're thinking about that.
Right.
Or like, you know, you don't have a pencil or paper. For me, I think I kind of took a bit of that, like almost that frugality, almost to an extreme, even at our modern times with my parents, because like I did not want to write. I did not want to, like in my university years, I didn't want to write or do anything like that. I'd rather put it down in my laptop and just put everything down there. Because for one, I mean, I think writing it takes a bit longer, but also you don't have to buy more paper. You don't have to buy more paper or notebooks to do any of your notes. You can just type it down somewhere. So that's what I did. And like, I mean, looking back, like there's, psychologically speaking, it's better to actually write certain things because it's more imprinted in your mind. But like that was my trade-off, that I was like, oh, I'd save like a couple of dollars here and there if I just get good at typing and putting down everything in my laptop. And like that's just a trade-off on how it is. And like people just need to adapt. It's like, I mean, there's just so many solutions out there. It's not like if you're lagging behind, you're just done for. And I mean, I think there's a lot of free, especially with the internet being accessible to so many people, smartphones being accessible to so many people. I think at a certain point, there's no excuse. And I'm just going to speak it in for like the United States. This is going to be very bold and almost like boisterous. I feel like if you don't make it in whatever success that you might see, if you aren't successful and like you grew up in the United States, I think that was a choice more likely than not. And excuse me, like there are certain impediments like disabilities and things like that that does happen, but the United States has such more opportunities, especially in our modern time where you can learn almost every single skill that you want to learn online. Like there's so many people that are willing to give you their 20, 30 plus years of experience in a video format, like so you can learn it. And I find myself almost overwhelmed by it because like I find that if anything, somebody at this point of in time can learn so many things just by like scouring the internet, and in particular YouTube. I think that like some people might even say that there's certain subscriptions like master classes, but I think YouTube honestly is one of the greatest education devices in the world. Like I think it is Google's best create. Like I guess they acquired it, but it's like one of the best websites in the world because you can learn anything and everything in YouTube. Like I think there's also so many jobs out there that like you can learn the skills and then you can actually apply it. There's marketing, accounting. I'm an accountant, but like you can learn everything that I've learned in YouTube. There's people there teaching free stuff, finance. There's just so much stuff that you can do. I think there's just lacking people to actually do it.
Let me like paraphrase you because like you said that humans are capable of adaptability, and you know when we set all these regulations, when we set all we make all these changes to make it like trying to equal that nobody gets hurt, we're kind of limiting people's area for growth. And the truth is we're punishing successful people. We're disincentivizing people to be successful because we're taking it away. I mean, look at Cuba. Like I think I should say this, like fair wage for everything I think is the stupidest idea ever, because you work so hard to become in demand by the market, and yet the government restricts your capacity to earn or to be rewarded. I like in my personal experience, like if you look at human evolution, people have survived not because like they're really strong creatures, but because of their ability to adapt. That's the reason why people have different physical structures in different parts of the world, and that's because they've adapted to their environments, they've adapted to their experience, they've adapted to their situations. Like in my personal experience, I don't think I would have grown far into my career and to be the person that I have, and I've seen myself grow a lot, if I wasn't exposed to US culture and exposed to mentors from the United States. If I only had Philippine mentors, I would have seen that my view of things wouldn't have been this wide. I wouldn't be able to do the things that I love to do. But because I have had that exposure, because and you remember what I was? Remember when you were talking to a friend of ours, and that friend was like, "Oh, one of the things that Chris has is like he lacks passion, or like he lacks he's kind of shy about a lot of things."
Uh-huh.
Like, yeah, remember that? And I remember, like, yeah, that was me in a small fish in a big pond. But because I was able to adapt to the situation, I was able to adapt to my environment and the demands of that environment. I was able to grow physically and mentally. I was able to, grow, yeah, I was able to grow in my experiences, and that's what helped me. I would, if I the worst thing I could do for my enemy is to just make it fair for him and all of his buddies and make them very comfortable. Like
Mhm.
make sure they don't get offended and make sure they live like not a lavish lifestyle, but just like a convenient kind of a lifestyle where they don't get offended.
You're making me think about like prosperity, kind of. But like there's also a negative side of prosperity, which is you get comfortable. And when you get comfortable, you can go you become complacent. And so, like you were mentioning that, but like I'm hoping that like I saw you as a big fish in a small pond by the time you graduated. So I'm like, what? But like, yeah, like there's always so much room for growth with those the different schoolings as well. Like it just depends on how, like you were talking about like successful people. How should we make people help people aspire to become more successful? I think the best way to do it is like if is to simply give them those skills, but also we can't give them that desire. I don't think. I think what's gonna happen throughout remaining years and just how the world's gonna be with the AI and things like that. I think life is actually gonna get a lot more complacent. It's gonna be a lot easier in that. What's gonna happen is a lot of work, with AI is probably gonna be what is it? It's gonna be too old. Like we'll be using AI for certain work positions, and what's gonna happen is people are gonna have their needs met, but because of that, we're not really gonna push ourselves too hard. But maybe that's just my more pessimistic outlook with how things are at the moment. But obviously, it's also going to be driven by all those super hyper successful people that are trying to do other things. But it kind of also makes me think about how the United States is the place to go, I think, if you want to be really, really successful, or if you have reached success, that you would be going to, because there's going to be so much more opportunities to do stuff there. And in my opinion, they're just with those opportunities. There's going to be more like-minded people that want to make change. And there's going to be a little bit of a brain drain with other places in the world, but like I could be wrong. We'll see how that goes.
When you say like the United States is like a great place to be, I really think about it. I really think about it, why that is. There is no question in my mind that the United States is the greatest country. Like, at one point in time, it's the greatest. If you ask me, it's the reason a lot of people perceive it as the greatest country is because at one point it really was, and the reason that it really was because you have the Bill of Rights that protects people's freedom. It may not always be necessarily be in your favor. It may, you're gonna have opposition. Like, for example, freedom of speech is one thing. Like, I can say things, and I don't think I won't be jailed for it, as long as it's not something that incites, like incites violence, like in an actual sense. That's another thing. But also, like, to protect people, it's to allow people to work and to incentivize and to benefit for themselves. But in that reality, when you have enough for yourself, you're also willing to give to other people. Can you, like, I don't like think like so a lot of people think like especially in the Philippines, a lot of people think like the rich are like these evil people, but like I also know that a lot of rich people who give more to charity because they have capacity to do so.
Here's a question. Do you think a person deserves, like, do you think a person should have more than $1 billion?
So my answer to that is that it depends. If they obtained it through legal means, through hard work, and because they were able to create something of value, yes. If they obtained it through legal means like stealing, then and stuff like that, then absolutely not.
Okay,
But
because
if
I
it's
think
fair, yeah.
some of the emotional pains of a lot of people when they see the rich is that, hey, you have oodles and oodles of money. Why, like, you don't need that much. You don't need, let's say, like an arbitrary number of $100 million. You don't need that much. Like, so we should, and there's so many people suffering out there. Like, we should, like, out of 100 million, let's say 90 million of it,
Oh,
and
yeah.
help alleviate the pains of everybody, and you can still be rich with your 10 million.
There's so many problems with that, but let me start with responding with that video of the judge asking the Starbucks CEO, it was like, you're a billionaire and your employees are like earning this much, like shouldn't they be paid more? And the billionaire, like the CEO responds, yeah, I am, but like growing up I lived in government subsidized housing, and like I didn't like this company that I built, I'm a billionaire not because like I did it illegally, but because I earned it. I worked hard for it. I did something that nobody else did. Nobody gave it to me.
Well,
So
he couldn't have been a billionaire if he didn't have so many people working for him, and people willing to serve the coffees and like man the shops.
and there's the key word with it, willing. You were willing to give a service in exchange for a salary. And if you're not willing, then you're always free to find another job because there's going to be someone who would want to do it. I know a lot of people who like there's a lot of people who are willing to do the blue collar jobs that no people wants to do, and they're willing to do it because it's better than the alternative that they had. The key is like willing. They're not forced to do it. They're willing. They are happy to do it, and they see that it's a
Well,
fair exchange.
well, what if that it's they're not willing? They have to do it so they can support their families, and like there's not a lot of opportunities out there.
Well, you're again, you're. It's not that you're forced to.
Mhm.
Let's clarify what force means. Force means is like force means that you know what I think of force is like you're a slave, like your own. You have to do this. You have no rights. Like
Mhm.
this is your only option. It's that or be killed. For
Mm.
this one
But
is like you're not forced.
But isn't this modern day slavery now when people are, let's just say, like making minimum wage? Isn't that a form of slavery that they're only getting paid, like they're not getting paid enough to live or support their families, and they have to take in maybe multiple jobs? Like, isn't that unjust that the people in the very top, yeah, are able to relax when the people in the very bottom, that they're workers, the reason why they're able to be in their luxurious suites is because they're on the backs of those workers?
Well, here's my response to that. Like, nothing's stopping them from leaving. Nothing's stopping them from doing something, pursuing something better. Again, like, here's the thing. I'm not the judge. Even as the CEO of the company, I'm not the one who decides what your value is. It's the market. If you think that I pay you less than what the market thinks you are worth, then you are free to go out there in the market and choose for yourself. But if you're in a situation where I pay you more than the market thinks you are valuable for, then it's kind of like something that you're not doing or something that you should be improving on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's something that you can change. The answer is never leveling the playing field to meet the lowest common denominator. When you have an average set of numbers and there's one number that's pulling it down, the answer isn't to lower everything else. The
Mm-hmm.
answer is to raise that number higher. Like you got, and sometimes sometimes it's within your control. And like you said earlier, there are a lot of things that you can do. There's a lot of online educational platforms that will allow you to develop these skills.
Hmm. But doesn't the, like you
Used.
were talking about, like, sure, yeah, they, like, the market stuff, but doesn't the CEO, or if you're rich, don't you have the moral obligation to help those in your community? Aren't you obligated as a CEO to look after, like, your common denominator, as you say it, the people working at the lowest level of the company?
Like I'm a big fan of charity and I'm a big fan of kindness, but when kindness is when is forced, incentives become lower. You're creating an environment where one if you continue with this in the long term, one day you're not going to have these billionaires, you're not going to have these successful people, you're going to have less input, you're going to have less output, there's less GDP and there's going to be less money flowing around, and as a consequence there's going to be less people helped, there's going to be more poor people and less money going around to help these people. But because you created a system where you incentivize people to become successful, what happens? These successful people are able to help build the economy. They're giving more people jobs. It helps
Well,
keep the economy running, and you also have these ways to you have the greater capacity to help people. Isn't it
so
true that being able to be a billionaire and be able to donate more is better than being like a normal average salary person and be able to donate a little bit?
what's wrong with the idea that the highest level of an organization should be, like, let's say, okay, like, maybe they're like, okay, like, they're pretty smart people, but, like, why is it that their salaries, for example, is, let's say, 5,000% difference with their lowest position? Isn't that immoral? Isn't there something wrong with that picture? Because they're both human beings that, I mean, like, that they can eat, like, they have certain needs, and there's a certain threshold that can be met if the person at the highest level just kind of just gives it, like, gives that portion to the lowest people. Now they too can, be able to have success.
Hmm. I well, I know that it can sound unfair, and people will make bad guys seem like like these demons who are kind of selfish and greedy. But
So are you saying that it
yeah,
is unfair?
no, I'm not saying that it isn't fair. I'm saying that you're able to provide more value, then you should be rewarded more for it. Not because like you're not like you're better than everyone else, but because you have more to contribute to
What do
society.
you mean by
I
value?
like value, like for example, if you're a doctor, you help save lives. Like think about a doctor and a cab driver, both are human beings. Doctor is given more value because they're able
Okay.
to save human lives, meanwhile a cab driver is only able to save you a trip across town.
Sure. Okay. So
So
I understand that, and that seems pretty fair that the doctor would make more. But how is it fair then that, how come our teachers don't make as much as, an entertainer? Or, like, let's say we're going back to with the doctor. How come certain athletes make more than doctors? Is, like you were mentioning about their value. I mean, the doctor can save your life, can save lives. Like, what does an athlete do? Why is that fair that the athlete is making so much more than the doctor?
I think it's like kind of unfair when we compare like a normal teacher to like a superstar MVP athlete. Like whenever we think of athletes and these pop stars, we already instantly think about LeBron James or Taylor Swift. We don't really think about like the small players, like say like an average like basketball coach or like a small university player. Like it's easy to discriminate when you're comparing to different levels. You compare like if you want to compare like a teacher and athlete, you should compare like Oprah. Oprah wanted to do teaching, and like in one of her statements, she said she still does teaching, which she just does it on national TV. So in a sense, like she is a teacher, but she provides value in a in a different sense, and she has worked hard to know her target audience and to be able to tailor it to that target audience, and the market was able to value her. It's always looking about it's always looking to how much you provide and the value that you provide to the market. Like mentioned earlier, it's always the market who basically decides. It was never about it was never about like who just makes the most money. It's always about who provides the most value in society. And sometimes the market would determine, yeah, this is what this our money is the one that does the talking for us.
Mhm.
We say one thing, but the money that we spend on says another. And that just shows us which one provides most value to us as a society.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Actually, like I would agree with all those points that you would say. Like,
You keep pushing, like you were
oh
pushing
yeah,
me and pushing me there.
I'm just trying to play a little bit of a devil's advocate, but it
Right.
makes me think about how, like, you as an individual would probably value like at a one per one like per case to case basis. Like you, if you were needing surgery, you're gonna value the surgeon a lot more than anything like in the world.
Mm.
But in general, in your normal everyday like life, you probably would value the surgeon pretty low. You probably like value the person creating the music that you're gonna spend money on, and you show that because you're actually spending money on that person, like, you know, and your attention or things like that. And then it might feel unfair as a society, but just remember, like, you as an individual, like myself as an individual, tell the marketplace what I value. And actually, that's so funny. Like, I actually have another topic, but I think it should go for another time, because this topic, like, for example, like the adult industry is like kind of makes me think about seeing like the most used websites in the world or something. It's like, huh, like
Wait, is that what you were trying
it
to
is
like tell me
it
the
kind
other
of makes me
day?
think about it now. Like it like certain in the adult industry, like there's certain websites is like that is the highest traffic, but nobody seems to be using it publicly. It's like, huh, interesting. And it's just one of those things where you might not agree with it. It might not be unfair, but like, but those other industries, those other fields are not stupid. They're not like they're not stupid in that like they also have to entice real people to be a business. And I think if and sometimes people see the success of other people, they don't really see the nuances, the late nights, that like the level it takes to be successful. People see Elon Musk as the richest person in the world, but like the level of dedication that he had to do,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of like remembering how like he was already a multimillionaire at like the age of 26. He had one business, was able to sell it, and then practically helped create PayPal,
Right.
became an even more like higher like multi-millionaire. Most people, once they have like more than, you know, like 50 million, $100 million, are probably gonna be like, okay, I don't need to work. It makes sense. But he bet his like whole thing practically to start Tesla, even though he didn't need to. And now like Tesla blew up, but just like it could have easily have failed as well. And people forget about all those many failures. And I think an important to remember is a note to remember is in the United States, anyways. I believe it's about like 80 to 90% of businesses fail within 2-3 years. And it's not like, I mean, like to be able to do that, you know, you would think people did a lot of research, and I'm sure they did, but it also theory is much more difficult, is more different than the actual thing where people have to work, and people just have like it takes a lot more brain power and physical action, late nights to actually accomplish that. But kind of reminded me of how Amazon Jeff Bezos was saying how if you're starting off, yeah, like you just need to keep working, work. But then once you make it, when you start, like yeah, maybe you have to forego sleep to be honest to get everything set up. But like once it's successful, you need your sleep because when you first started, you need to make like 20 plus decisions, really impactful decisions every day. But once you made it and the thing is running itself and it's really good, you really have to make like 1 or 2 decisions every day. That's really, really important. And to be able to do that, that's why like the most successful people, they all work out, they all like get their sleep, things like that. So then with that 1 or 2 decisions that they need to make a day, they're well and prepped for it. While before they make 20 multiple decisions, like they just have to keep hustling.
Well, yeah, I definitely agree. With this podcast, like I'm really hoping something that we would have learned already is that to have really proper incentives and to we've always said it all the time. We're trying to encourage and we're trying to have more successful people, and usually that comes in the form of incentives. So yeah, I think this is a good way to end. This has really been great. Yeah, thanks, Sean, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, thank you.